So now we're going to talk about how basal energy expenditure is measured. And by the way, I'm getting a little bit more comfortable with this whole YouTube video thing, so I hope I'm saying less. So BEE is measured by a process called indirect calorimetry. So you're not actually measuring the energy expended, you're measuring at rest, you're measuring the oxygen consumed, because the oxygen consumed is proportional to energy expenditure. Because when you use protein, carbohydrates, and fats to make ATP or energy, oxygen is consumed in the process. So oxygen consumption is an indirect way to measure basal energy expenditure, hence the name indirect calorimetry. So here's two of my former graduate students. We did research on the accuracy of metabolic rate prediction equation. So we measured our subjects' basal energy expenditures with the indirect calorimeter. So again, you see this was in the 90s. So Jane, my graduate student, had a mullet. On the right, we have Keiko. She was one of my graduate students who's now a dietitian. Jane is a professor in Ohio. So you can see that Keiko is breathing into some tubing that goes into a machine. The machine measures the oxygen level in her expired breath. So we know the oxygen content of room air, and the machine measures the oxygen content of her expired breath, and there's a difference. And so because she's consuming oxygen while she's burning energy at rest. So that's how it actually determines the oxygen consumption, and then you multiply it by a factor because oxygen consumption is proportional to energy expended, in this case at rest. So most of us don't have the equipment, so we can predict basal energy expenditure with prediction equations. And this was the research that the three of us were working on. We were looking at the accuracy of those metabolic rate prediction equations. Equations are not great, but they'll give you a ballpark to start with. As a clinical dietitian, it's really important to be able to estimate someone's calorie needs when you're doing a tube feeding or an IV feeding. In a critically ill patient, overfeeding can cause problems. It can cause excessive production of carbon dioxide that can make their condition worse. And you certainly don't want to underfeed somebody who is sick. Some people have to be on tube feedings and IV feedings long term. Some their whole lives if they can't chew or swallow. So we want to be really accurate. So we start by predicting their energy expenditure if we don't have an indirect calorimeter with an equation, and then we adjust. We monitor and adjust. So don't think that this equation is going to be perfectly accurate in estimating your basal energy expenditure. I've measured basal energy expenditure of people with thyroid disease, for example, and it was off by 500 calories, which was a significant amount. So it gives you a starting point. Now, one of the most commonly used equations that's used is the Mifflin-St. Jeor equation, and I've put a link to a calculator so you can actually calculate. See if it'll come up. It should be coming up. It should be this website will calculate your basal energy expenditure. You can see you just put in your age, gender, height, and weight, and then it will give you this says basal metabolic rate, but that's the same as basal energy expenditure. They're used interchangeably. It'll give you your basal metabolic rate. And then I use this site a lot, actually. Let me close out that. I don't see the pop-up on my screen. But anyway, it will, it actually automatically multiplies the basal energy expenditure by activity levels so that you can determine your total energy needs, your total calorie needs. The link is in the PowerPoint that I posted online. If you want to see, get an idea of your ballpark, again, it's a rough estimate amount of calories needed. This is one thing thing I wanted to bring up, as far as manipulating your metabolic rate, we used to emphasize aerobic exercise for people wanting to lose weight because of the calorie burning effect. And because especially vigorous aerobic exercise does increase your metabolic rate for a period of about 24 hours after the exercise. But now we also emphasize weight training for people who are losing weight to prevent the loss of lean mass that normally occurs. Remember nitrogen balance. We recommend the resistance training to minimize or prevent the loss of lean mass because remember, if you lose lean mass, your basal energy expenditure is going to be lower. So both for weight loss, both aerobic and resistance training is important. Okay, so let's see, we finished talking about resting energy expenditure, or basal energy expenditure as one of the ways we burn calories. We also burn calories through physical activity. And like I said before, this is the one we have the most control over, and it's the most variable. Okay. In fact, lack of physical activity or sedentary lifestyle is one of the major contributors to the increase in obesity that's occurred since the 80s. You can see here the segue. We don't even have to walk anymore. Don't know if you saw, let's see, was it that Mall Cop movie where he was on the Segway. So another way that we burn energy that we talked about is a thermic effect of food. It'll burn about 200 calories a day. About 10% of the calories you consume are burned in digestion, absorption, and metabolism of that food. Now, some foods will require more work than others. For example, something that's really fibrous and solid will use up more energy in digestion. Something that's liquid and is absorbed really easily and quickly and slips right through the digestive tract to be absorbed at the small intestine, that won't burn as many calories. So, and the macronutrient composition also influences the thermic effect. So the consistency of the food as well as the macronutrient content. Protein has the highest thermic effect. Carbohydrates have the second highest effect because metabolism increases when you absorb amino acids and monosaccharides. They go straight to the liver for processing, and that processing requires some energy. Fats have a lower thermic effect. They don't take a lot of energy to convert to dietary and body fat, but there's extensive metabolism of the amino acids that you absorb and the monosaccharides you absorb in the liver after you eat. So again, we mentioned thermogenesis in the last video clip. That is basically burning off energy as heat. It can be done through non-voluntary physical activity that's triggered by overeating or a cold environment. In fact, they think that that's one reason that that Denver has the lowest prevalence of obesity, is that people are exposed to a colder environment, and it takes more energy to maintain a normal body temperature. So things like fidgeting, shivering, maintenance of muscle tone or balance. You might have seen balance boards. It requires some energy to maintain balance, to maintain posture as well. You'll burn more energy sitting than laying down. You'll burn more energy standing versus sitting. I read a really interesting article a long time ago about fidgeting. Some people who are big fidgeters, major fidgeters, their ankles always moving when they're sitting down. They have a hard time sitting still. They can burn up to 800 calories a day. Now, what I found, I tried to make myself become a fidgeter, but what I found is either you're a fidgeter or you're not a fidgeter. I'm pretty much not a fidgeter. There's some people who have a high sympathetic nervous system tone. That is, I think of people, they tend to be really lean. I have a friend whose eyes are always, wide open. It looks like she's always ready to jump up and do something. She has a high nervous system tone. She'll burn more energy off as heat. When you're stressed, oftentimes you'll burn off more energy as heat because your nervous system activity increases. Now, a lot of us make up for that increased thermogenesis from stress by stress eating. We'll talk about that later. So people who have a high thermogenic activity may have a hard time gaining weight, actually. And I know a lot of people who are in this situation. So I'm going to stop this video and talk about how to determine, well, no, I'm going to continue because it kind of follows with what we've been talking about. So to determine the total number of calorie needs, you can use that Mifflin-St. Jeor equation to determine your basal energy expenditure, but you multiply your basal energy expenditure by an activity factor, depending on your activity category, which you can see the different categories there and the factors that you'd multiply your basal energy expenditure by. So if my basal energy expenditure was 1,400 calories a day and I was lightly active, I would multiply 1,400 times 1.375. Okay, and there's descriptions of the different categories. A lot of people tend to overestimate the activity category that they're in. That website that I had the link to actually automatically multiplied the basal energy expenditure by activity level. This is an easier way to estimate calorie needs. Again, they're all just rough estimates anyway. Multiply your body weight in pounds by 13 if you're sedentary, 15 if you're moderately active, and 18 to 20 if you're very active. Again, this won't be accurate if you're very overweight or very underweight, but if you're at a reasonable body weight, this is an easy way to estimate to get a starting point as far as how many calories you need. So again, remember, calculations are just estimates and can be way off for certain individuals. So that's where I'm going to stop this video, and I'm going to do the next one on body weight and body fat standards.